All right, let's dive right in. We're going to peel back the layers of history today, and what we're looking for is a kind of hidden blueprint, this universal pattern that seems to show up every single time a great empire meets its end.
From the Romans to the Ottomans, the British to the Soviets, you name it, every single one of them shares this one unavoidable thing.
Yeah, it's that simple, and it's that brutal. They're all gone. No empire has ever lasted forever. They all eventually just disappear. Okay, so that's the big question, right? Is it all just random? A bit of bad luck here, a bad leader there? Or is there a predictable script that history follows again and again?
Well, it turns out there just might be. And you know what's really wild? There's this fascinating new field of science that's basically trading in the dusty old history books for data models and algorithms to try and find the answer.
It's called Cliodynamics. And yeah, it sounds complex, but think of it like this. It's applying the hard rules of physics or biology to the grand, messy story of human history. It's all about looking for these underlying laws that govern how civilizations rise and how they fall. And right at the heart of Cliodynamics is this theory called the secular cycle. You can see it here. It's basically a four-phase blueprint. It all starts with phase one, expansion. These are the good times, right? Low population, plenty of resources, high wages. But then comes phase two, stagnation. The population swells, resources get tight, and you get this kind of golden age for the elites, but trouble is brewing. That leads directly to phase three, crisis. This is where infighting and instability really kick in. And finally, you hit phase four, depression. The whole system collapses, often into civil war. This four-part cycle, this is going to be our guide for the rest of this journey.
So, that's the theory. But does it actually hold up in the real world? Well, let's put it to the test. We're going to look at four of the most powerful empires in history.
First up, Rome. Come on, we've all heard the story, right? Barbarians at the gates. But the data shows that's just the final scene of the movie. The empire was already rotting from the inside out, totally hollowed out by its own internal problems long before those so-called barbarians gave it the final push. And here's where it gets really stark. Look at this number. By the end of the empire, a tiny elite, less than 5% of the people owned a staggering 80% of all the land. This created this massive chasm between the haves and the have-nots, and that tension is what would eventually tear the empire apart from within.
So how do you even measure something like inequality? Well, there's a tool for that called the Gini index. Basically, a higher score means more inequality. Now, as this chart shows, the Roman Empire clocked in at around 0.46. Now, take a look at the modern United States. Its score is, well, it's pretty much identical. According to this data, the U.S. today has a level of wealth inequality that is on par with Rome's just before its collapse. Seriously, just let that sink in for a second.
Okay, let's move on. Case number two, the Ottoman Empire. I mean, this was a true titan, lasting for 600 years. It survived countless wars and political drama, but what finally brought it to its knees wasn't an army, it was its balance sheet. Yeah, the empire was caught in what you could only call a perfect economic storm. On the inside, it was just drowning in debt, printing worthless money. You know the story. But on the outside, new global trade routes were bypassing it completely. And a flood of cheap foreign goods and all that silver from the New World basically wrecked its economy. It had completely lost control of its own economic destiny.
The British case is really interesting because it's so different. It wasn't conquered. It didn't even collapse into chaos. It was more like a managed bankruptcy. The empire simply became a bad business decision. It was too expensive to keep running.
And World War II was the absolute turning point. It didn't just financially shatter Britain, it completely broke the economic logic of having an empire in the first place. All of a sudden, the costs of policing and administering all these colonies were way higher than any profits they were making. The game just wasn't worth the candle anymore.
And that brings us to our final case study, and maybe the most dramatic one of all, the Soviet Union. I mean, this was the fastest collapse of a superpower ever. 1 minute it's this nuclear behemoth dominating half the globe, and then poof, it's just gone.
And this timeline just perfectly illustrates that mind-boggling speed. Think about it. In 1987, the Soviet state seemed permanent, indestructible. Just 2 years later, reforms start to shake the foundations, and by 1991, it's officially gone. It just goes to show how quickly a superpower can unravel once those core foundations really start to crack.
So, we've looked at Rome, the Ottomans, the British, and the Soviets. What's the common thread here? What are the universal laws, the hidden patterns of imperial collapse? Well, we've identified 5 big ones that seem to connect them all. Okay, pattern number 1, extreme inequality, every single time. When wealth gets this radically concentrated like we saw in Rome, the social glue that holds a society together just dissolves. It creates this vast impoverished population and a tiny ultra-rich ruling class. And this isn't just about fairness, it's a structural problem. It's like piling up dry tinder, just waiting for a spark. And it creates the perfect conditions for the next deadly pattern,
which is what's called elite overproduction. So that super wealthy class, it starts producing way too many people who want to be in charge. Too many ambitious, educated folks all fighting for a very limited number of top jobs. In Rome, this led to a solid century of civil wars between competing generals. This vicious infighting basically paralyzes the state from the inside. And you see this dynamic in the final stages of other empires too.
Third pattern, control of trade is absolutely everything. Both the Roman and the Ottoman empires were dealt a fatal blow when the key trade routes that were the lifeblood of their wealth were disrupted. Bottom line, when you lose control of commerce, you lose control of the empire.
Number 4, imperial overstretch. The very same military that was built to expand and protect the empire eventually becomes the anchor that drowns it. The cost of defending these huge borders, and this was a massive burden for Rome, Britain, and the Soviets, it just drains the treasury. It turns the state's greatest asset into its greatest liability.
And finally, the 5th pattern. And this one is maybe the most surprising of all. The final push over the cliff often comes from well-intentioned reforms. Think about it. Gorbachev's perestroika wasn't designed to destroy the USSR. It was meant to save it. But when you try to fix a system that's already deeply fragile, one that's already weakened by all the other patterns we've talked about, those reforms can unleash forces that just tear it apart even faster.
So, here's the crucial point, right? These aren't just fascinating stories from the past. They're data points in a recurring historical cycle. They are, in a very real sense, a warning from history. You know, they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And as we've seen, the data suggests one major nation today has a level of wealth inequality that eerily mirrors the Roman Empire's just before it fell. We've put links to the data down in the description. So the question is, what can we learn from that? And maybe more importantly, what might that tell us about the future?